Comrade Keith Bennett.
The Great October Socialist Revolution was an event that had a profound impact on Iran and Iranian society. And if we can look at this in a kind of geographical context, if you like, for a moment, of course the October Revolution had influence around the world, but you can say that it particularly had a profound influence on many of the countries that shared a border with the Tsarist Empire, which went on, of course, over the space of a few years to become the Soviet Union. And perhaps too often in Britain, we think of Russia as being a European country, as opposed to a Eurasian country, a country more than half of which is geographically and one can say in many respects culturally situated in Asia, a country which borders on the Middle East, has many millions of Muslims among its population, and which, for example, in the case of Iran, there are many nationalities whose people are to be found on either side of the border. The main example in the case of Iran would be the Azeri people, where of course there was a Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan, and where the Azeris in turn also make up the second largest nationality in Iran, including not only the recently defeated presidential candidate, but, and this is the fact that's less frequently mentioned, also the present Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei is an Azeri. The capital of the what became the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan, today the capital of the independent, or supposedly independent Republic of Azerbaijan, then an important oil city in Tsarist Russia, was Baku. And the oil workers of Baku were one of the sections of the proletariat of the Tsarist Empire, in which the Bolshevik Party had a particularly strong influence. And so we're talking about an area, about a country which is a close neighbour of Russia, at a time when there was movement of peoples and a great ferment of ideas. Iran is a country that's had a strong communist movement. It's also worth noting that Iran is actually one of the very first countries in the world, outside of perhaps Britain and Germany and Russia, where Marxist ideas and the communist movement began to spread, where the history of the communist movement goes back in Iran to the late 19th century. One can contrast this, for example, with China, where Marxist ideas only began to enter into China after the victory of the October Revolution. But in Iran, those Marxist ideas predate the October Revolution, with Marxism becoming introduced to the country's intellectuals and working class in the late 19th century, not least because of the country's proximity to the Tsarist Empire and therefore to the Bolshevik Party. And as a result, the Communist Party of Iran, the original Communist Party of Iran, was formed in June 1920 in the province of Gilan. And later, for a short time, what's popularly known as the Soviet Republic of Gilan was established, which lasted for about 2 years, and its official name was the Persian Socialist Soviet Republic. Although it was established with the aid of the Red Army, it was politically independent from the Soviet state. Later, in the aftermath of the Second World War, there was, for a time, with the help of the Soviet Red Army, an independent Kurdish republic was formed in the north of Iran, which meant also that the Kurdish national movement at that time, although far from being under the leadership of proletarian forces, was nevertheless strongly influenced by the Soviet Union and by the ideas of friendship and alliance with the Soviet Union. So Iran is a country with, as Ella said, a very sophisticated proletariat and a history of a strong communist movement. And what if you like, spoiled that communist movement was in essence, although the precise details vary from place to place, but was in essence what spoilt the communist movement everywhere in the world, and that was, of course, Khrushchevite revisionism, which turned the Tudeh party, which was the form taken by the Communist Party in Iran in later years, from a revolutionary to a reformist party. And again, as with other places around the world, an anti-revisionist movement also grew up in Iran. So far as I know, first coming into independent existence around 1965 and advocating an armed struggle in the south of the country, where they had where a significant section of the Tudeh party had joined with the anti-revisionist movement at that time. And the external influences on the anti-revisionist movement in Iran were much the same as those that influenced the anti-revisionist movement in other parts of the world at that time. The Cultural Revolution in China, the Vietnam War, the struggle of the Palestinian people, and so on. And other revolutionary movements also grew up and developed in Iran at that time, such as the Fedayeen, who were part of the communist movement, but perhaps could be said to look more to the ideas of Che Guevara and the influence of the Cuban Revolution than other sections of the Iranian anti-revisionist movement, and the People's Mujahideen, organization of Iran, who were, I believe, influenced by the ideas of Ali Shariati, who Ella mentioned, and who attempted, if you like, to create what they saw as a sort of a fusion between Islam and Marxism. And this was a revolutionary organization, although it later, in my opinion, changed into what it is today, namely a counter-revolutionary organization. The Shahs regime was an extremely repressive and cruel and vicious regime, which made any type of organizing extremely difficult and drowned in blood and torture and any attempt to organize a revolutionary movement. The anti-revisionist movement was also confronted with the actual strength of the revisionist movement in Iran, not least because that movement had enjoyed significant state backing from a superpower, the USSR. And there were the problems of, I would say that there were problems of dogmatism and idealism of an anti-revisionist movement that, at least in its early days, were substantially not based in the working class. And this led in turn to its inability to weather the various changes in the international situation, but rather to be disoriented by them. So that various things contributed to demoralizing and dividing the anti-revisionist movement in Iran because of that movement's inability to deal with them in a proper way. These included the fact that China gradually changed its external policy to stress the building of good state relations with all countries, and in particular to develop close relations with third world countries, irrespective of their social system, in the context of which they built good relations with the Shah's regime. And then the various divisions that came with the death of Mao, the arrest of the Gang of Four in China, the split between China and Albania, and so on. And so that one ended up with the position where, with the kind of rigidity and formalism that sometimes characterizes the implementation of China's foreign policy, the Chinese leader at the time, Hua Guofeng, went ahead with a state visit to Iran at the time when when it was clear to absolutely everyone that the Shah's regime was crumbling, and thus became the last foreign leader to actually visit Iran and apparently endorse the Iranian regime. And again, this is not a specific criticism of Iranian Marxist-Leninists. It's more or less a universal phenomenon if we sum up the history of the communist movement over the last decade. But too many Marxist-Leninists in Iran were overly fixated on these points rather than addressing the questions of their own revolution. And the divisions that this engendered continue to characterise and to hamper the Iranian Marxist-Leninist movement to this day.